Hey everybody, Matt Colville here. We hit 50,000 subscribers a couple weeks ago. As of the recording of this video, we're at 53,312, which is madness. It's kind of insane. I really had no idea. I just want to thank everybody for watching, and it brings a lot of joy in the strict kind of Thomas Aquinas sense into my life to know that there are quite a lot of people out there right now running Dungeons and Dragons and having fun because they watched these videos and thought, oh hell, I could do that. Yes, you can. It's the whole point of the video. And if you are a Dungeon Master right now, my message to you is tell your players that soon it will be their turn to run for you. Thus, our new Dungeon Masters created. I really had no idea when I started this channel that anybody would care or watch. I sort of figured that the response I would get from people would be negative, that I'd get other DMs telling me to shut up, that I didn't know what I was talking about, and not to tell them how to run their game. It really was just being in the right place at the right time. There's a new edition of D&D 5th edition. There's Critical Role, which is a fantastic show that I watched on my own even before I'd had this channel. And specifically, I think there's just been a cycle. When I was, becoming a professional game developer in the 90s and started working at a little company called Last Unicorn Games, the attitude toward Dungeons and Dragons was really negative and toxic, and there was a lot of one true way-ism, and the attitude from a lot of DMs I knew was not inclusive, it wasn't encouraging, and if I had tried to do exactly the same channel when I was in my 20s or when I was in my 30s, I think the reaction would have been mostly negative, but all those players, I think, have all cycled out of the hobby, and there's a whole new generation of people playing, people who are teenagers in their 20s or 30s who are like, I've wanted to play D&D for a long time, I've heard about it, it seems like a lot of fun, but I knew nothing about it, and there's a new edition of D&D which really happens to encourage that kind of play and being a new dungeon master, and Critical Role shows a great example of how the game can be played, and then here's my channel saying, hey, you can do it, it's not that hard. So I'm just incredibly lucky to be at the right place at the right time and have amazing supporters and subscribers. I want to thank everybody who's subscribed. Speaking of supporters, we had thousands of people, like 3,000 people, I think, commented on the Fantasy Grounds giveaway. I had a giveaway. I have already awarded the prizes, and instead of giving away one copy of Fantasy Grounds, really what I thought I would do is give away one copy of the Ultimate License of Fantasy Grounds, all the core books for D&D, and like 1 or 2 adventures. But it turned out that that was not really any different in price than all of the Wizards of the Coast D&D content. So, and then when I saw how many people were commenting, and I was like, wow, there's like over 3,000. The odds of winning are really low. And I just felt bad for people who were commenting knowing that the odds were so badly against them. So I thought, hell, I'll give away 2 copies of that. So that's what I did. I went and got 2 copies of the Ultimate License for Fantasy Grounds at all the D&D content. And the winners were Michael Whaley and Christian Belleville were both already contacted. Both have been supplied with their prizes. I know I only went from, the odds of winning were 1 in 3,000 to 1 in 1,500, but it just made me feel better because like I said, I felt bad that people were commenting, and I was like, oh, your odds of winning are so low. And in general, that leads us to our next topic, which is giveaways. And I like doing giveaways, but the ones we've been doing, like the Fantasy Grounds giveaway, didn't really move the needle. I got more subscribers out of that video, but every video I do increases my subscriber count, and that video didn't do any better than any other video. In fact, the video that really did get a lot of positive attention was the 4th edition video. I was really surprised. Again, this is one of those things where right place and the right time. If I had made that exact same video a year ago or a year and a half ago, I think there was still a lot of negativity in the marketplace, and we just had to wait for that to get out, and then we could have a reasonable discussion about this fantastic game. That video got me a lot of subscribers. The Fantasy Grounds giveaway one didn't really, and that's something I've noticed. I've now done, I think, 3 giveaways, and none of them really moved the needle in terms of gaining me new subscribers. Actually, the first giveaway actually did move the needle, but that was because it was part of a much larger program on my part to get new subscribers. That was part of my contest with my friend Jason Hill to see which of us could get to 5,000 subscribers faster, because back then that seemed like a lot. It still seems like a lot to me. 5,000 subscribers is ridiculous. 50,000 is ridiculous times 10. It means that when I was at a Rush show a couple of years ago at Irvine Meadows Amphitheater, double the number of people in the audience are now subscribed to my channel. By the way, YouTube tells you that. When you hit certain milestones, YouTube says, congratulations, your audience, if all your subscribers got together one place, you would now sell out like the Rose Bowl or something like that. I'm not there yet, but I do get those notifications, and they are actually a lot of fun. Having done a couple of contests now and seeing that they don't really move the needle in terms of subscriber count, I think I'm going to do it differently in the future, because saying, hey, comment below, commenting doesn't have any effect on my subscriber count, really. What I'm probably going to do in the future is have social media campaigns where I will have a giveaway, and to enter, share a link to this video on Twitter or Facebook, and we'll do one platform and then another. And I know I'm going to get a bunch of negative feedback on that, because a substantive percentage, I think, of my audience are older grognards like me that hate social media, but I'm not one of those people. I love social media. I've been online communicating and building communities and participating in them since I was 13 and I had a modem and was dialing up BBSs, which, if you have any idea what I'm talking about, congratulations, you're old. So for me, social media is a big part of my life. I love Twitter, I love Reddit, I love YouTube. I had a blog, I had a podcast. None of those had the kind of vitality and audience tools that YouTube does. YouTube is fantastic. So if you don't like social media and you're grumpy about that stuff, remember that that includes this channel you're watching now. Therefore, future giveaways will be tied into actually sharing my videos on various social platforms, and probably Twitter. We'll start with Twitter because I love Twitter. And that way, I think I will probably see, first of all, fewer people will do that, I think, than just comment below. And that means the odds of winning will be better for them, and that makes me happy. And then also, sharing my videos on a social platform will, I believe, this is part of the experiment, will, I believe, actually increase my subscriber count in a meaningful way. I don't know what the next contest will be. It'll probably be something like a really nice, expensive set of dice. This, by the way, is not really a D&D video. We'll have some discussion about Dungeons and Dragons, obviously, but it's not part of the Running the Game series. It's mostly just me saying thank you for 50,000 subscribers, how insane and crazy that is. We're going to do a Q&A. I have a bunch of questions here we're going to answer. But speaking of YouTube as a social platform, one of the things I thought it would be fun to do would be to give back to the YouTubers that have inspired me and just talk about those YouTubers that I follow and that I admire. One of the things about YouTube is there are so many people using it in so many different ways that it is possible to be a YouTuber out there that has millions of viewers, and still most people watching YouTube do not know you exist. And so even though most of the people I'm about to tell you about have way more subscribers than I do, I think there's a good chance you haven't heard of most of them, and in some cases any of them. Also, I think you'll find that all of these, I watch a lot. I don't have television, I don't have cable. I cut the cord back in like 2000 and never looked back, and certainly haven't regretted it. And I spend a lot of my free time now, what little free time I have, watching YouTube and watching various YouTubers, and I watch many, many different YouTubers I'm subscribed to, but these YouTubers are the ones that specifically have inspired me, and I think you will notice a trend that we'll talk about when we get to the end, something they all have in common. Let's start with a brand new channel that I just discovered and just started uploading content a couple months ago, but already has several dozen videos up. Brad Bridges, aka Prag Chattery 777. We're starting with the fewest subscribers. He just hit 100 subscribers. I think I was subscriber number like 80 something. And all he does is spend about 15 or 20 minutes talking about some of my favorite albums. My taste in music is both broad and deep and encompasses a lot of old music and a lot of brand new music, but my first and most passionate love will always be progressive rock. I love Dawes's new album. I love FM84's new album. I'm always trying to challenge myself. I always want to find new music. I always crave new music and getting turned on to new stuff. But Brad Bridges, all he does is talk about the classic 70s, and he gets into like the 80s stuff. He talks about Kate Bush, the classic progressive rock album. So I'm going to link to all these in the doobly-doo. There'll be an example video, typically the video that got me hooked. In this case, it's him talking about Thick as a Brick, which is a fantastic album from one of my favorite artists, Jethro Tull. And I'm linking to a Jethro Tull. Jethro Tull's not my favorite band. Probably Genesis is my favorite band if I had to pick one, but Jethro Tull is just a band that I think is fantastic, and Ian Anderson is a legitimate genius and hasn't yet come into a revisory period where people look back at that catalog and go, wow, Jethro Tull was one of the biggest bands in the world, bigger than Led Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin opened for them on a couple of tours, and they were huge, and they were the toast of music for a little while, and then they were perceived as kind of getting full of themselves. But really in the 70s, rock critics thought it was their job to turn people on to new stuff, and the way they did that was by slagging off the stuff that they used to like only a few months before. So tastes changed rapidly, people fell out of favor, and rock criticism, music criticism was, we would now perceive, highly toxic. And Jethro Tull, Ian Anderson's band, having been at the height of popularity and being toasted by all of these different music journals, all of a sudden, very quickly, the opposite happened, because that was the cycle back then. And as a result, I think one or two generations have missed the genius of this band. In fact, because of his Jethro Tull videos, I went out and I rebought all of Jethro Tull's back catalog in 5.1 surround. Stephen Wilson from Porcupine Tree is going through a lot of classic progressive rock albums, because specifically progressive rock, because that was an era in the 70s where the mixing board and the engineer were king, and you got these incredible albums with all sorts of stereo separation and lots of sound effects and, 48 track recording where there's tons of stuff going on. And so having it now go from being in stereo to being in 5.1, you get this great separation. I was listening to Minstrel in the gallery in 5.1, and it just blew me away. So thanks to Brad Bridges, Ian Anderson managed to sell his albums to me again. The 5.1 mixes, if you're into that kind of stuff, and you can find Steven Wilson's 5.1 mixes of Yes or Jethro Tull, I strongly recommend them, especially if you have a nice audio system. Brad talks about a lot of different albums. I haven't really listened to Gentle Giant or what's the other one? There's a Van de Graaff Generator. These are bands that I've never really heard anything by, but Kate Bush, Jethro Tull, he goes through a bunch of Genesis albums, including some of my favorites. Yes, he covers most of the Yes catalog he's caught up with. He hasn't gotten the 90125 yet, which is a very divisive Yes album, but one of my favorites. And basically everything he says is what I think of those albums, with one or two not notable exceptions. Like, my all-time favorite album is probably Wind and Wuthering by Genesis. It is just beautiful, and when I was 15 years old, it opened my eyes to what music could be. I was just listening to pop songs on the radio. If you just YouTube, you just imagine pop music now, right? Doesn't matter what era you're talking about. If you just imagine the pop music, the stuff, the top 40 stuff you listen to on the radio, and then go on YouTube and listen to Wind and Wuthering, you may have some idea of how it blew my little mind when I was 15 that music could sound like this, and it just completely changed my life. And that's what Brad is talking about in his channel, and it's just him spending like 15 minutes talking about the stuff he loves. He's not a music critic by any stretch of the imagination, except he is definitely being critical of me. He likes saying it's just a chat, it's not me being this isn't a review, but they are reviews. I don't know why we are always so allergic to saying this is a review. He's definitely reviewing these albums, but he tends to take each album on its own merits and on its own terms, and as a result, you get a lot of really interesting discussion and insight out of his videos. Check his videos out, watch a couple of them, and if you like them, go ahead and subscribe. I'm not recommending people subscribe just to see the little number go up. That's kind of antithetical to the nature of this platform that we're on. But again, if you were like me and you watch a couple of videos and you go, wow, I really like this guy, he's got a lot of passion, he's fun to watch, then hit the little subscribe button. Also, something I don't think most people know, I'll just put a little footnote here. When next to the subscribe button, there's a little bell icon, and I do this every once in a while. In fact, all of the videos, and I think maybe that's what all of these videos have in common, for one thing, is these are all videos where I hit the little bell icon. The little bell icon means ignore YouTube's algorithms for what to alert me to, and always alert me. Always alert me when one of these people uploads a new video. Because if you're like me and you have like 20 or 30 people you've subscribed to, you can be bombarded with notifications regarding new uploads, and you quickly learn to ignore them. So YouTube has an algorithm to fix that, and it says, okay, this video I'm going to alert Matt to because it's more the kind of thing he likes in this person's, or it's super, of all the things this person's uploaded, this one's super popular. I will make sure Matt knows about this. Hitting the little bell icon means you will always get a notification. Let's move on to Techmoan. I have no idea what that name means, but he's someone about my age, and he is just completely fascinated, crazy in love with 80s and 70s hi-fi stuff. There's a certain look and feel, this brushed aluminum knobs and cool lights. His channel is basically bifurcated, so one channel has two topics, and they're related, obviously. One of them is talking about dash cams and mobile video recording equipment, and I think that's how he got started. But then he started doing retro tech videos, and that's where I fell in love with him. Fascinating videos. The one I linked to in the doobly-doo is his big epic video on audio cassettes and all the different kinds that were out there and how you could get them to sound really, really good if you had the right equipment. And he goes online, he just is excavating archaeologically the history of audio video equipment, home video equipment and audio equipment, and he'll go online of some obscure formats I've never heard of, and on eBay he'll buy these things, he'll repair them himself to the best of his ability. He's not an engineer, so it's always interesting to watch him take one of these things apart and see how it works. And usually all you have to do is replace the little rubber tension band or whatever it's called. Obviously, you're not going to be able to hear what he hears when he reviews some of this audio stuff, like the cassette episode that I linked to in the doobly-doo. He goes through the whole process of seeing, can you get CD quality audio on a cassette? And it turns out if you had the right equipment and the right technology, yeah, you could make an audio cassette sound as good as a CD. It's pretty phenomenal, but that was near the end of audio cassettes, because that technology, getting that kind of quality, required really expensive gear and really expensive audio cassettes. But that's the reason, I think that was the video that made me subscribe. Even though I'd watched several of his videos before then, that video got me to click the subscribe button, because I spent a substantive percentage of my teenage and early 20 years making audio cassettes for various girls in my life. And it's 25 years later and I still get texts from ex-girlfriends saying, what was the name of that album with that song on it? I can't remember and I have to have it. I'm about his age, but I don't have the same passion he does for that 80s. I like the look of that stuff, but I'm perfectly happy with modern audio video technology. But I just love learning about all of these, in many cases, discontinued or dead on arrival audio video technologies, some of which were amazing and really interestingly thought out, and then some of which are crazy little Rube Goldberg devices, like an auto reverse. This is a real thing, an auto reverse cassette deck that the way it would flip the tape over is literally like ejecting it up over itself and flipping it over and then catching it and playing it. And I'm like, that is madness. Just watching these engineers solve these problems and then watching this guy on YouTube talk about how these things work is fascinating to me. So again, watch his videos, and if you get a sense that, yeah, well, this is great, I love spending time with this guy and his passion for this old retro tech, hit the subscribe button. We're going from least subscribers to most subscribers, and all of these people have more subscribers than me with the exception of Prag Chattery 777, and the next up is Comic Book Girl 19. Comic Book Girl 19 she's a huge Marvel fan mostly. She talks about comic books. That's her channel, is reviewing comic books and comic book movies and talking about them. And I had been watching her videos kind of I think we all go through this process of discovering new YouTubers, and we don't subscribe right away. We just kind of cherry pick the videos we're watching. In other words, we begin by watching, that's an interesting subject. That's an interesting subject. I don't care about that one. I don't care about that one. That's interesting. And then eventually we feel like we get to know that YouTuber and we like everything they do. And that's when we hit subscribe, because it's like, at this point, I just want to see everything you're putting out. And for me, that moment where I went from only watching Comic Book Girl 19's videos based on what she was talking about to being like, okay, I'm in, whatever you upload, I will watch, was when she did this epic, like 3-hour-long series on the X-Men, specifically Chris Claremont's run in the X-Men in the 70s and 80s. I had forgotten what a huge, colossal impact on me that guy's writing was and how much I loved the X-Men. Chris Claremont basically invented the idea of bringing soap opera plotting into comic books. Before Chris Claremont came around, comic books were mostly just people punching each other and different heroes fighting different villains and different interesting powers, and it was action and adventure and really wild things, or they would go to space or something like that. But Chris Claremont invented the notion of these characters being like soap opera characters that fell in love, and this one would die and come back, and that one turned out to be a doppelganger and a long-lost identical twin. These things all happened in his comics. And romance suddenly played a huge part in his comics, and when I was at that age, 13, 14, 15, I was 100% primed for that. I think the reason I sort of put the X-Men behind me and packed it up and forgot about it was because after having seen 3 or 3.5 of those X-Men movies, I think I got 15 or 20 minutes into X-Men Apocalypse before I was like, I can't, it's relentlessly awful. I sort of forgot how much I love the X-Men, and watching Comic Book Girl 19, she rejuvenated my affection for those old stories and reminded me, yeah, they were really good. Those were great characters. This Wolverine on screen is not the Wolverine I knew or grew up with. They just share a name. It takes a lot for a movie or a series of movies to completely destroy my love for something, but those X-Men movies managed to do it for the comic books, and Comic Book Girl 19 turned me back on to that stuff that I loved from back then and basically gave me permission to love it again. And there was a great moment in this, like I said, 3-hour-long epic series where she talks about some of the stuff that happens between Jean Grey and Scott Summers, and she made a great, brilliant, insightful comment, and I think that's probably where I went, okay, subscribe. She said, this thing that is happening between these two characters, no spoilers, this thing that is happening, if it were happening in the real world, it would be incredibly toxic, right? But reading about it in a comic book, reading about it in a fantasy, it's super hot, and it's this great romantic epic, like Romeo and Juliet kind of love affair, and that kind of thinking I have a lot of respect for. I think we as a culture, specifically American culture, has a very poor relationship with art. Simon Schama once said that Americans think that great art leads to democracy, by which he meant that we imagine that the purpose of art is to somehow make us virtuous and better people. And that is not the case. Art can be challenging, art can be, it can be ambiguous, and that notion that this relationship, I can fall in love with these characters falling in love in an incredibly toxic way without me being an unhealthy person or having unhealthy relationships in my life, that one has nothing to do with the other. I see a lot of people online all the time slagging things off because the things happening in that movie or in that comic book are, if they were happening in the real world, they would be bad. And it's like, but that's what does that have to do with anything? Again, these people have way more subscribers than I do, but I suspect many of you have never heard of these people. So if you like comics, if you like Marvel comics, go check out Comic Book Girl 19. She is super positive. She has an incredible amount of energy. All of these people, by the way, are all very charismatic in different ways, and they are great at engaging an audience, and you find out eventually you just want to see whatever they're going to talk about next, you're in for. Next up is Tom Scott, he was just a web programmer who he ended up on a couple of BBC game shows, and then somehow, I don't know the story exactly, he now has his own YouTube channel, and you can kind of go back far enough and watch the evolution of him as a presenter and a YouTube personality or just a person on TV, and he is a very charismatic educator, basically. He goes around the world and and talks about these interesting places and interesting subjects. The one that I link in the doobly-doo is him. He's in San Francisco, and he's talking about this plan this guy had to dam the San Francisco Bay and drain it, and how much real estate you would get and how much easier the traffic was to get back and forth. And so the US Navy built a model of San Francisco, not in a computer, in concrete, and simulated the tides and the water flow and the traffic and everything around San Francisco Bay at a certain scale so that they could do this experiment, run this experiment. And even though it turned out to be, as a result of this science, a terrible idea, so they never did it. I mean, that's the purpose of doing experimentation, is to see, is this a good idea or a bad idea? They kept this model for 30, 40 years and used it to do lots of science. So it's just a channel about stuff you probably didn't know about, presented in a super engaging way. It's often very short. You know, you might not be interested in progressive rock, you might not be interested in retro tech, you might not be interested in Marvel Comics, but gosh, you have to be interested in interesting things by definition, and that's what Tom Scott's channel is about. Like all the other people on this list, he's one of those folks that I just could watch and have watched for hours. I'll have him on while I'm working. I'll dip into his channel at random points. I'll watch the same video several times, having it on in the background before I really absorb all of it. And it's like comfort food, and it's educational comfort food. Like the other YouTubers I'm talking about, Tom Scott has tons and tons of content. You can watch him for hours. I typically have these folks on while I'm working, while I'm writing, or even while I'm playing games, and they're on in the background, and that lets me dip into their content several times. I'll have the same video on several times, getting different things out of it every time. But then every once in a while, like Comic Book Girl 19's X-Men series, or when I first discovered Brad Bridges' Prag Chattery channel, I sat in a chair and on my TV, I watched YouTube for hours. So you can consume this stuff like you would watch TV, or you can just have it on while you're working. It's a lot of fun. Now we're getting into the realm of YouTubers who have millions of subscribers, but also were the ones who directly inspired me. I watched them and thought, wow, you know, there's no graphics, there's no animation. It's just them talking to camera, and I love this. I love their videos. Maybe I could do something like this. John and Hank Green, the Vlog Brothers, every week, each of them makes a video directed to the other. They're brothers. This is how they keep in touch. And they talk about whatever is happening in their lives or in the world that they think is interesting. And it's often fluff and just entertainment, but sometimes it gets serious. The video there's a link to in the doobly-doo is one in which John talks about where our healthcare money goes. And it's really straightforward. And you start to understand, wow, our system is like, there's a reason that our system is so much more messed up than every other civilized country. A lot of my style, I don't do the edits that he does where suddenly I'm sitting over on the right of the camera and I deliver for a little while, and then your eye gets tired and I need to mix things up, so I move over here and I talk on this side of the camera for a little while. I don't do that kind of thing because it's just more work than maybe I should do it. Maybe it would be interesting because it's just rolling back and forth, and I got a new chair. It's quite nice, but it's just, it's already enough time. My videos are longer than theirs typically, and so jumping back and forth between different positions is just kind of a pain in the ass and more work than I want to do. So that's the one thing I sort of didn't steal from them, is that method of editing back and forth. But I mean, their videos are better than mine, so maybe that's something I should be doing. I should aspire more. But they kind of showed me, look, you can just talk and be passionate, and if people can see that this is something you're genuinely interested in, and you're taking each of these topics, this is the theme we'll talk about in a second, on their own merits, rather than on your merits, rather than on your criteria, then you will attract an audience. Finally, one of the most popular YouTubers, and one of the first people I ever subscribed to, and kind of the beginning of me going from watching YouTube videos just because somebody linked them to me watching videos the way I used to watch TV and the way most people I think watch TV, is Marcus Brownlee, MKBHD. Marcus Brownlee is one of the most popular YouTubers out there, and I think he's the most popular tech reviewer. He specializes in mobile tech. He covers mostly smartphones. He also covers new tech like drones. He covers the new electric cars that come out because he's super interested in that kind of technology. Combustion engines, who cares about those? But if it's basically a giant smartphone like a Tesla, then he's crazy in love with it. The video I linked to in the doobly-doo is Marcus Brownlee's video. I was going to do his Truth About Beats by Dre video, but because that's such a terrible product, and as a result, his video is basically him saying, here's why these are terrible, I thought I didn't want to link to something negative. Let's link to something positive. And I linked to his video about the best headphones of like 2015, but they're all still the best headphones. And that might have been the video that got me to subscribe, because in that video, he talks about and extols the virtue of open ear headphones. In fact, he recommends the first open ear headphones I ever got, which was the Grados Labs headphones. Grados Labs is an obscure company, but they make great headphones. They have phenomenal staging. They have phenomenal separation, which are things that you want, and things that open ear headphones are really good at. It's going to seem somewhat counterintuitive to recommend headphones that are designed explicitly to let ambient sound in, but it helps give you that feeling when you're listening to the music of being in a theater or being in an audience where there is ambient sound around. You get room sound. And from Grados Labs, I eventually graduated to the Sennheiser HD 700s. these are some nice headphones. But you really have to be an audiophile to care about stuff like that. Those are some expensive headphones. But if you're somebody like me who's a huge audiophile and you spend a lot of time listening to music and it makes up a big part of your life, I can recommend them. Just if you've never tried open ear headphones, the Grados Lab headphones, I think they're $80 or $100, and I think you'd be surprised at how amazing it can be to feel like you're listening to music sort of live in the room with you, as opposed to in a soundproof room with no other sounds but the music from your headphones. MKBHD's reviews they're not unbiased. The notion of an unbiased review is, I think, an oxymoron. He has things that matter to him, but he takes all this technology on its own terms. If this is a piece of technology that he personally wouldn't use, but he can see why some people would, and he can see why it has good features and bad, then that's what he talks about. And that, I think, is the theme of all of these YouTubers, including, I would like to think, me, is that we take these subjects. It's just each of these channels, including mine, is just a head talking to you about the things that they care about and are passionate about, and that, I think, is what engages an audience. And in each case, we're talking about things that it's not our criteria that are important. We take, like, for instance, the only reason I can do a 4th edition video is, even though I don't play 4th edition anymore, when I did play it, I took it on its terms, and I had a lot of fun playing it. Brad Bridges doesn't love every single progressive rock album, but he extols the virtues of each one because he's able to find the virtues in each album and talk about where it let him down. And in each instance, he's talking about that album on its terms. When Techmoan talks about technology, it's often technology that he would never use now, but he loves seeing how once it was popular or once some engineer thought this was a great idea, and he's excited to talk about that idea, even if it turned out to be a dead end. That, I think, is the secret to a good YouTube channel, is just talking about the stuff that you love and turning other people on to amazing stuff and taking your subject on the subject's merits rather than on your own personal criteria. I did a poll on Twitter, what video do you want to see next? And I probably should have phrased it differently because the campaign diary won by a landslide. So the next video, and it's going to be I'm probably going to film it. If not tonight, I'm going to film it tomorrow, Saturday, for being up on Sunday or Monday. So quickly after this video, you're going to get a D&D video, and you're going to get a campaign diary that recaps everything that happened for, like, in the past month, and it's quite a lot. And it's going to include the live stream we did on Twitch because I wasn't really happy with the way that went. So we'll recapitulate that. But that's not this video. This video is the 50K video, and one of the things I wanted to do, now that we've talked about the giveaways and how they worked and what I plan on doing with them, we've talked about the YouTubers that I follow and that inspired me, now we're gonna do a little bit of a Q&A. I asked people online to ask me anything on Twitter, on Reddit, and these are, people asked a lot of questions, and I didn't want to spend hours answering them, so these were, I thought, the best, most interesting, most fun questions. What's one thing you miss from old school D&D that isn't popular nowadays? That's a great question, and the answer is, I thought a lot about this, and I love 5th edition, and there's very little, I don't really have any criticisms of 5th edition right now that I can think of. I'm sure if I worked on it, there might be something that I could. I don't like 5th edition's, how magic poor everything is assumed to be. I'm from the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons era, where if you go through a module, an official published module, you got tons of loot. It was crazy. I like that era, and so for me, a game that is designed to be like, you should be 5th level by the time you find a +1 weapon is kind of weird to me. I mean, I actually think, and I guess I'll just say this, I think it's bad design, because I think your players should get the experience of finding a cool magic item early, because it'll hook them and make them want to play, right? So the idea that you shouldn't even find a +1 sword for months of play is, to me, somewhat ridiculous. But to its credit, 5th edition, super easy to mod, so it's very easy. The thing I love about it, the thing Mike Merles designed it to be, he wanted it to be easy to mod, so it's very easy to kind of ratchet up the numbers and award magic items faster than the game is intended to be. What do I miss about old school games? I miss modules. I miss short, punchy adventures that you could run in just a couple of weeks. Even Lost Mine of Flapdoodle takes months to run. Nowadays, an official published adventure, is expected to take you from like 1st to 10th level and take a year and a half to play if you're playing every week. And that, to me, is, it's great that those things exist, and I think those products are really high quality, and every time one comes out, I dream about running it, but then I never do because I can't commit to that one story for that long. I like the idea of, I buy all these different modules and you buy different modules and we stitch them together in different ways, and we're supplementing them with the old Dungeon Magazine. Dungeon Magazine used to be every other month they came out with 4 or 5 different short adventures, and some of these things were things you could run in one night, and it was fun, and some of these were terrible and you didn't like them, and so okay, you didn't run them again. But then you built up this catalog in your brain. One of the reasons I can do sandboxing the way I do is I've run dozens of adventures, and I take the ones I like, and now I've got them in the back of my head and I can trot them out again. I like adventures that are easy to read, that don't take hours hours and hours to read and digest and understand, and then I can string them together however I want. And on my end, the act of figuring out how do the players get from this cool adventure that I like to this cool adventure that I like requires me rewriting both of these to some extent, and that makes them mine. And I love that process. I love the idea that this adventure can be really serious and this adventure can be somewhat lighthearted. And I also like having lots of different small adventures means I can give my players lots of different options, and I can make it a world that they are more free to have ambition in. And I want to go here and do this. It's like, okay, fine. Keck wants to be a lord and a leader of men and recover a great artifact. It's like, well, that's great. I've got the Axe of the Dwarvish Lords and always wanted to run it. And so he can just go do that. You can't really do that with something like Storm King's Thunder. You're sort of committed to running this thing for months. So that's the thing I miss about running D&D back in the day. I also miss, this has nothing to do with D&D. This has more to do with just getting old. I miss being a teenager and playing D&D, 4 or 5 times a week, in and amongst other stuff, going to the beach, going to the mall, going to the arcade. I love doing all that stuff and playing other games and then playing D&D. And I also miss that era where most of the people in the group would try their hand at dungeon mastering. That, I think, is a culture that I'm trying to revitalize and fell by the wayside for a long time. And the world ended up divided into players and dungeon masters, and that's nonsense. Let's destroy that idea. Anybody should try to run the game. Even if it turns out you're bad at it, it will change how you view the game, having seen from the other side of the screen, and you will appreciate your dungeon master better. Who are some of your favorite authors? Well, we're going to do a video on Appendix N, which is the fantasy stuff that I've read that I rip things off of. I do that all the time, and because these books are now from the 70s and from the 80s, now somewhat obscure, they are great sources because your players will have no idea that this is an original thing that you did on your own. So apart from that, those authors, which we'll get to, and in fact, I would say most of my favorite authors are not in the Appendix N that I'm going to do. So let's start off with Tim Powers, one of my favorite authors. Check out the Anubis Gates, check out Last Call. Those are the typical places to start. He writes sort of magical realism books that take place in the modern day, but always have this crazy fantastical element to it. And there are themes. There's a running theme through his books. I think his greatest novel, his greatest achievement is Declare. Declare is a book about the early days of the British spy industry in the 20th century, and these British spies end up competing with the KGB to try to get to the top of Mount Ararat, where Noah's Ark is, because there are Arabic jinn demons up there. However crazy that sounds, it does not read crazy. The dude does a colossal amount of research, and in every Tim Powers novel, the weirdest things in there that you're like, okay, this is the thing he made up, actually always turn out to be stuff that really happened in the real world. Like one of his books involves a kid who ends up inadvertently sniffing opening a vial, a glass stoppered vial, and sniffing the ghost of Thomas Edison, and ended up being possessed by Thomas Edison. Again, I know that sounds crazy, but it's not written crazy. It's written super in a straightforward, believable way. And it turns out Thomas Edison really did have somebody take his last breath, literally his last dying breath, and capture it in a glass vial and stopper it up, and it's still out there in a museum somewhere. Tim Powers is great. Ian Banks was he died early, fantastic science fiction author. His Culture series is amazing. I think Look to Windward is one of my favorite books. Where to Start with State of the Art is a classic sci-fi book that introduces you to his great setting, the culture. But I got started with a very challenging book called Accession, and everyone says don't start with Accession because it's too weird, but its weirdness is what turned me on to it and made me go, wow, this is different from everything else I'm reading. And Accession is a book that is half the book is just these AIs talking to each other, and it's funny and dramatic and exciting space opera stuff. It's kind of Baroque space opera, and the central conceit of Ian Banks's Culture series is, what if the Federation were real? The Federation from Star Trek, what if they really had that kind of technology? It would not be the culture you see in Star Trek. It would be a much wilder, crazy thing. His books are amazing. He had a huge influence on me, and there's also often, even though some of his subject matter gets pretty dour, there's a lot of drama and tension, obviously, there's a lot of humor in them. He's a very funny writer. Haruki Murakami, who is perennially on the shortlist for the Nobel Prize, one of the greatest living authors, inarguably Japan's greatest living author, but often the literati in Japan are sort of embarrassed by him because all of his books, which are very popular in America and in the West, all feature Japanese characters living in Japan who are disaffected young men who, while everyone else is in the shopping center buying their groceries wearing a suit because they just got done being a wage slave, his main characters are always the ones in a Van Halen t-shirt. Like Tim Powers, Haruki Murakami's stuff is magical realism, but whereas all of Tim Powers' magical stuff is super overt, Haruki Murakami's stuff is often very subtle and in the background. I think 1Q84 is his great achievement. I loved 1Q84, and for a little while after I read that, I'm like, I think this is my favorite novel. But it's really long, and it was originally released in 3 books in Japan, and a lot of people felt like the 3rd book let them down, but me reading it all at once, I did not feel that way. 1Q84, I mean, I think Wind Up Bird Chronicle is maybe the canonical place to start with him, or Kafka on the Shore, or there's a couple of different good starting books. 1Q84 opens with a woman. She's on her way to an appointment. I won't tell you what she does or what the appointment is, but she's stuck in traffic on a freeway in Japan. It is literally not moving. It hasn't moved in 20, 30 minutes, and she thinks she's going to be late, and she looks over out of the window, and she notices that there's an access way, a pedestrian access way that like construction workers can use to get off the freeway, and she decides, you know what, screw it, I'm just going to get out of the cab. I'll pay the guy, get out of the cab, and I'll walk there. And as she's in the process of paying the cab driver and telling him what she's going to do, the cab driver turns to her and says, just remember, no matter what happens, there's only one reality. And she's like, why would you say that to me? What is that? What? There's what? And the cab driver's like, oh, nothing, don't worry about it. And the whole book then is about what happens when she ends up in sort of this alternate timeline. Or is it an alternate timeline? There's a point where she's on her balcony and she's having wine after work, and she looks up in the sky and she looks at this beautiful full moon that's hanging up there, and she's just thinking to herself about what a beautiful evening it is, and there's the moon is illuminating everything, and there's the second smaller green moon behind it, and she's like, wait a minute, second smaller, has that moon, has there always been two moons? Has that moon always been there? Have I just never noticed it? What is going on? This is super weird. And this is the first inkling that she has that she's not in the reality that she's used to. Everything else is exactly the same. And there's this great, her internal monologue is hysterical. She's like, am I going crazy? How do I ask somebody about this? How do you just bring up in conversation, hey, so you know how there's two moons now, right? And if there was always been two moons, they'd be like, what do you mean now? What are you talking about? And if it's just me hallucinating, if I bring up two moons, they're going to think I'm crazy. That is by no means the strangest thing that happens in 1Q84, but Murakami's stuff is brilliant. His stuff is just so easy to read. You grind through 1,000 pages in just a couple of hours. It's effortless. Robert B. Parker, you can't go read Robert B. Parker Spencer stuff if you read my novels, because then you will see all the stuff I'm ripping off and stealing. Robert B. Parker had a huge impact on me as a person, as a reader, as a writer. He wrote like 4,000 Spencer novels. If you're looking for a place to start, I strongly recommend The Judas Goat. It's not the first book, but it's a super good one. Parker's writing had a colossal impact. You will see it if you read his stuff. You will see his influence in my writing, and Spencer is just a super unique character. He had a big impact on my ideas of masculinity, of what it means to be a male in this culture, in this society. And I just love those books. I still read them all the time. Speaking of still reading books all the time, I think at the head of the list, Parker, the two Ps, Parker and Pratchett for me. Terry Pratchett is the other author who wrote 1,000,000 books. I read them all. I reread them all the time. Like Robert B. Parker, that guy didn't hit a home run every time he got up to bat. And that's something I think his fans, don't like talking about. Every time somebody says, where do I start with Terry Pratchett? The dude wrote 1,000,000 novels. Everyone says, well, just start at the beginning and read them all. And that's the kind of thing a fan says, because the fans are uncritical. I recommend starting with Guards. Guards is a book about city watchmen in a fantasy city. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of pathos. There is no one apart from the guy who wrote Jeeves and Wooster, apart from P.G. Wodehouse, there's nobody out there, or Alan Corn, who had a huge influence on Terry Pratchett. Nobody writes humans and humanity and compassion and empathy and ethics the way Terry Pratchett does. That dude fundamentally understands the nature of the human experience, both the positive and the negative, and you get a lot of that in the Discworld. And I think there are a couple of perfect trilogies in and amongst the many, many books he wrote. I think Guards, Men at Arms, and Feet of Clay are colossal. Go read those. I think Weird Sisters and Witches Abroad, and then maybe Masquerade are a brilliant trilogy of books, the Witches series. The Tiffany Aching books, which are his young adult novels, but there really isn't any, apart from the fact that the main character starts off as she's 12 when we meet her, and each book advances her age a little bit. That's his version, a deliberate recapitulation of Harry Potter, but done his way, after there was some back and forth between him and J.K. Rowling, where J.K. Rowling said, it used to be 1% of all novels sold in the UK were Terry Pratchett novels. That's astonishing. And then J.K. Rowling came along and she became, 10% of all books. So it was a huge, colossal success. And that's fantastic. Great. Good for her. And then she said in an interview that she doesn't write fantasy and she doesn't consider any of her stuff fantasy. And somebody asked Terry Pratchett about that. And he was kind of like, what does she think she's writing that's got unicorns and wizards in it? But to J.K. Rowling's defense, she had read stuff like the Chronicles of Narnia and the Lord of the Rings, and she was those books are really weird and I think difficult to read in a modern age, and she bounced off them, and I'm not surprised. if you're a young girl looking for fantasy with strong female characters, I think you could do a lot better than Lord of the Rings and the Chronicles of Narnia. So I'm not surprised J.K. Rowling bounced off those things, but obviously she was writing fantasy. So after she said that, Terry Pratchett's like, right, let me see if I can do this Harry Potter thing. And he wrote an amazing, I liked the Harry Potter books, but they had nowhere near the impact on me that the Tiffany Aching books did. Again, the Tiffany Aching books follow, Harry Potter is a young wizard who wants to go to wizard school. Tiffany Aching is a young girl who wants to be a witch and go to witch school. And it turns out that witch school is this. It's the world and every lesson you learn in it. And it's got fantastic characterization and great moral, ethical lessons. And you would think, oh, that's good because it's a young, kids need to learn these things. But all of Terry Pratchett's books are all about ethics and morals. If you want to start with Terry Pratchett, start with Guards, or start with the Tiffany Aching books with We Free Men. You will not be let down or disappointed. They are amazing books. Have you ever DM'd with multiple DMs? Have you ever co-DM'd, somebody asked? And the answer is yes. I have yes positive and yes negative. Let's start with the yes negative. My friend Jim and I have on more than one occasion tried to build a campaign setting together so that we can just trade off who is running and the players don't have to shift from one entire campaign setting with all different rules and names and characters and plot lines to another. And that did not work the first couple times we tried it because I cannot play in a game world that I created. I don't believe in it. I know too much about it. I know it's not real. And for me, the juice of Dungeons and Dragons is that feeling that it's a real world, the verisimilitude, the suspension of disbelief. And it wasn't until my friend Jordy tried to do it and he said, I want to run a game in your setting, in my setting. And I was like, oh, that sounds great. And I just told him out of the gate. So the thing I've learned from Jim is that if you're going to do this, you have to pick some part of my world that I don't know anything about and then make it yours and invent there and let us play there. And then it can be in the same setting and characters that I'm familiar with from over here can go there and vice versa, but it will be your part of my setting and then I can believe in it. And that worked great. You might not have that problem, but that was the problem I had. And once I figured out that solution, it made a huge difference. I've also run with two GMs at the table simultaneously. My friend Jim kind of guest starred, co-DM'd with me at Pandemic Studios, and he did a great job. I learned some lessons there. And, since he's not the DM, I would give him the monsters to run. But Jim is a tactical mastermind. So suddenly that combat was way harder than anything I had ever run. I was thinking about I don't just think about things like what's dramatic. I also think about things like what do the bad guys know and what do they think and what evaluation are they making? And that's not the most that's not the same thing they would do if they knew everything I knew, right? Whereas Jim played them like it was a super cutthroat game. But then Jim also did stuff that was specifically to make it more dramatic and make it more narrative. Like he noticed that this ogre skeleton, I had given this ogre skeleton the ability to squeeze, because it was in a dungeon, the ability to squeeze into tight spaces. And so it was able to advance into the rear of the party and grab my friend Lara's character and then retreat with her. And it was so nasty and had so many hit points. It survived all these attacks of opportunity, and she was captured and taken below and prepared for a ritual, and the party had to go save her. And that was a super dramatic, the act of going to save her became one of the more memorable sessions that I played. Or ran, I should say. So having learned from Jim that having another DM there often increased the difficulty, saying, here, you run these bad guys. That DM isn't worried about the things I'm worried about. I took that into my new game, and when my friend Lars was not playing at one point, I said, hey, why don't you come help me run for these? He was in one group, and I was running for a different group, and I said, hey, do you want to come help me run the bad guys? And it was one of those things where I thought Lars would be a good dungeon master. Let's give him a taste of that. And so what I did was, in order to kind of keep some control over Lars has played a lot of Final Fantasy Tactics, so he's a good tactical mastermind, and I knew that if I gave him these zombies and skeletons, that he would wipe the party out. So what I did was I took a 6-sided die. It could have been any die, but the 6-sided die was the big one that was easy to read facings. And I said, this is the threat die. And when it's at 6, which is where it's going to start, I want you to do everything you can based on your knowledge of the rules and what these guys can do and what the heroes can do to just wipe the heroes out. Be as aggressive as possible. And then over the course of the battle, when that becomes unrealistic and undramatic, because this was just a battle in a tavern against some undead. It was not meant to be a battle to beat the band. It was just supposed to be an interesting moment and not a life or death struggle. But I knew with Lars in charge, it would become a life or death struggle. I said, I will slowly tick this die down. And when you see it go from 6 to 5, dial it down a little bit. And 5 to 4, it only went from 6 down to 4. But I watched Lars, when it went down to 4, he made these interesting decisions. He's like, okay, I know that if this zombie attacks this hero, the hero's wounded, the zombie will probably kill that hero. But the zombie doesn't know that. The zombie is a mindless creature, and this hero just attacked the zombie. So even though I, Lars, know what is the most tactically advantageous thing to do, if all I care about is challenging the heroes, it's not dramatic, and it's not necessarily believable, so I will have this zombie attack this guy instead, keeping this character alive. And that kind of thinking, now you've graduated from playing a war game to being a dungeon master. What are your thoughts on the just announced Tales from the Yawning portal, which includes the Tomb of Horrors? My thoughts are, that's interesting. I'll do a review of it. We'll probably get on Twitch and do it like we did with the Volo's guide. That was really popular. And we'll talk about what's in there, and I'll give my impressions of it. It's impossible to review an adventure or module without having run it. Reading it doesn't tell you what it's going to be like to run. All you're doing is reviewing the act of, is it fun to read? And that doesn't usually have anything to do with if it's fun to run. So it won't be until I've run it a couple of times that I feel like I will know enough about it to review it. But I will tell you that I thought they picked a lot of popular adventures, a lot of famous adventures. They didn't pick the best adventures. And that's where they let me down. Like, I think I have a handle on what the best adventures that they have published are, with, some difference of opinion based on taste, but they're often not the most popular adventures. So seeing something like the Tomb of Horrors in there really baffled me, because that is a deeply awful adventure. It is something that Gary Gygax came up with because he was just tired of people telling him that their characters were unkillable. Oh, in my DM's game, I've already killed all the gods and I've got all the artifacts, and so I'm unkillable now. And Gary's like, okay, fine, you're unkillable. Let's play right now, and in 5 minutes I will have killed your character, because it's trivially easy to do when you're the dungeon master. And that's what Tomb of Horrors is. It's like, okay, you touched this thing that you didn't know was dangerous, go ahead and roll. If you roll the wrong number, your character is just dead, and that's the end of the game for you. And that to me is not fun. But there have been many updates to Tomb of Horrors since then, and they're updating all these adventures. They're rewriting them. And I have faith that those guys will rewrite Tomb of Horrors to be not a huge pain in the butt kind of a troll, a way of that. I assume that their version of Tomb of Horrors will not be an attempt to give DMs the ability to troll the players. White Plume Mountain was in there, and I think that's a good idea. I'm glad they put White Plume Mountain in there, just because it's an opportunity to show people, look, D&D can be lots of different things. That's one of the points of this channel, is that there are lots of ways to play D&D, lots of different tones and lots of different stories you can tell. I'll buy it when it comes out, and I'll check it out, and I've liked everything they've done so far, so I'm sure I will like it, but we'll talk about it. Who first introduced you to the world of D&D? Great question. You will love this story. It was probably 1979, 1980. I was 9 or 10, and D&D had hit the news. All of a sudden, people were talking about Dungeons and Dragons because some kids so there was some disaffected youths whose parents were worried and ran away from home the way you did back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, the kind of Stranger Things plot line. And this kid disappeared for a little while, and the parents or the detective investing in it blamed it all on Dungeons and Dragons, which is exactly the same as blaming it all on Monopoly. But no one knew what D&D was, so it didn't sound as ridiculous back then as it does now. And it was in the news, and it was on TV, it was on Nightline, it was on 60 Minutes, and people were talking about it. And my mom was, I think, in her 30s back then. It was just her and me. I was the single only child of a single parent, and she was like watching this, and my mom had a strong theater background, and she's listening to the description of this game, and she's like, I don't know what that is, but it sounds a lot sort of like improvisational theater, and I'm really interested in that. And I think also, I can't ask her because she's not around anymore. I think also she just wanted to be the one at work who knew what it was. When she went to work on Monday after having watched 60 Minutes, she wanted to be the one where everyone else is talking about this crazy thing. And she's like, well, actually, right? So there was a lot of that in my mom. And so she went and she bought the Red Box. And that was my first experience with Dungeons and Dragons. It was very brief because, and this tells you a lot about both me as a kid and my mom as a parent at that age, I was a handful. And so she's describing this thing to me, and I'm just completely fascinated by everything. And that's something people ask me about I have a lot of friends my age, or you don't have to be my age, you can be in your early 30s and have kids that are starting to get old enough, 9, 10 years old, 7, maybe 8, and you think, ooh, I could start running D&D for my kids. And you can, and they will have fun, but like me and my mom, they will have fun because they're getting mom or dad's attention. And kids at that age love that. And the actual game itself, they will not get hooked. They will not start reading the book on their own. They will not start building a campaign world. It'll just be way too complex for them at that age. I think 13 to 15 is that point where all of a sudden, all of these charts and rules and spells, you start to believe that it's describing a world, and you want to spend time in that world, and you want to create your own world. I think, and you want to know the rules. That feeling of mastering and rules mastery I don't think really happen when you're that age. So I was one of those kids. I was just happy to be spending time with mom and getting her attention. It was great. And she was just describing the game to me and trying to figure out what she was trying to get started. And that's an intimidating process. Now she's organizing everything and reading stuff. And I at one point looked at some piece of paper, which it was the cover of the loose leaf cover of the product. And I lifted it up, I looked at it, and it was this classic, non-reproducible, wooden photocopy blue, the classic blueprint blue. And I'm like, oh, what is this? It's a map of the dungeon, of course. And my mom slammed it down on the table and said, no, You're not supposed to look at that. That's cheating. That's the dungeon you're exploring. If you look at that, then we're not going to play. And I was like, Mom, come on. And I just went, and looked at it, not really looked at it, but just lifted up. And she went, okay, that's it. And took the whole thing and threw it away. And we didn't play. And that was my first exposure to the idea of Dungeons and Dragons. She had heard about it because of the news. I had no idea what it was. And I didn't find out. That leads me to my next question. What was your first game of D&D like? Well, it wasn't that because we didn't play. My first game of D&D was probably, like I said, 1985, 1986, I guess, at my friend John Mara's house. John Mara was my first DM, and he was a great first DM. It was him and my friend. The first game I played in, it was him, my friend Dave Miles, who I still know and still play with. It's been 30 years, and we still get together, and we're not playing D&D right now. We play board games and card games and stuff, but I'm sure we will play D&D again, and probably soon. So it was me and Dave, and John was the DM, and I know at least Devlon and Jeff, who were brothers, were players, and it might have been just them. It's possible my friend Mark was there. Mark, I still see him every week. I still play with him. It's possible Scott Morrow was there. I'm not sure exactly, but it was Chateau d'Amberville. It was the Castle Amber adventure, which is a classic old school D&D adventure and a funhouse dungeon and a crazy, weird, surreal gaming experience. And that was fantastic for me. The notion that D&D could be this weird thing with magic mirrors and puzzles and stuff like that. I loved it. And I was basically just playing the character they told me to play. And there was a point, and this is again, I learned this early, and so I didn't learn it wrong. We split the party and we explored in different areas, and that was no big deal. And what the DM, John, was great at giving you some of the prompt, as they would say in a timeshare computer, giving you some of the prompt. And then just as this is next level DMing, by the way, just as these guys that haven't gotten the DM's attention are starting to get impatient, you ramp up the tension with this group and then leave them on a cliffhanger and switch. And that ability to keep those two things in your head, A, how are these guys doing? They're the ones who are just sitting around watching. At first, they will be interested in what you're doing, but eventually they'll just be champing at the bit to do their own thing. And when that gets to a critical boiling point, that's when you need to ramp up the tension in this game and stop, because ending on a cliffhanger will keep these guys engaged while these folks are doing their thing. So we're exploring Castle Amber separately, and Devlon, it was Jeff and I found a suit of golden plate mail. And we're like, ooh, all we knew was it was gold and therefore worth a lot of money, and we were going to take it back to town and sell it and we'd be rich. And back in the day when you made a D&D character, you would probably spend, I think we would each spend like an hour with our starting gold looking at the equipment list and imagining. I love this period in D&D, and I always want to go back to it. Once you've gotten to past 7th level, I always want to go back to being 1st level and spending your starting gold and looking at that equipment list and going, ooh, should I get a 10-foot pole? Should I get, let's get some rope and a grappling hook. Yeah, I'll get a grappling hook. Low-level D&D is fun because that kind of equipment can make a difference. And so having done that, all of a sudden, seeing plate mail made of solid gold, you say, oh, I can buy everything. This is great. Let's take it back to town. And we're like, well, how will we split it up? It's ours. We found it together. I'll take the top half of the armor and I'll just wear it, because otherwise, how are we going to carry it? And you take the bottom half. And when we joined up with the rest of the party in half and half, that we had no idea that this plate mail would be useful for anything other than selling. When we got back to the party, my friend Dave, who had played through Castle Amber before, went like a couple of years ago, because I started late, starting at 15 or 16, but my friends had been playing for 2 or 3 years at this point. Dave saw the golden armor and said, give me that. He's going to hate that I'm telling this story. He's going to feel like he hasn't lived it down. It's just an important lesson, because I was like, what do you mean give it to me? And he goes, I want it. And I'm like, yeah, but we found it. And he's like, I don't care. You're 1st level. I'm 3rd level. Give it to me or I'll kill you. And there was really nothing I could do except be stubborn and have my character die. And I really was not somebody who was raised to think in terms of confrontation as a way to solve problems. So I was like, well, okay, fine. And I gave it to him. And the reason Dave did that was because, having played through the adventure before, he knew there was a set of magical, not just magical, +3 full plate golden armor in here. And that's one of the things he was jonesing for in this game. And so there it was. Now he had it. And that was my first memory. And keep in mind, even though I have that story, and that story sounds like, it wasn't maybe at the time it was a bad story, but now it's just super memorable. It's the thing I remember about Castle Amber is this moment. And I loved D&D. That moment, even though I've had players that were, when that moment happened, they were like, oh, I didn't know D&D was a game where you can ruin my fun. No thanks, I don't want to play. There was a little bit of that, but not really. I just thought, okay, how am I going to get back at him? I said, let's keep playing. And my character became the bane of their character's existence. There was a lot of great political infighting in that group, and it wasn't perceived as being It wasn't toxic or anything like that. It was just dramatic. And so that was the start of a great campaign I played with John for years. How has becoming a YouTube celebrity affected your life? Well, it's, I don't think it's affected, of course I would say this, doesn't everybody say this? I don't think it's affected me as a person. I've always been a colossal egomaniac. So my friends in real life, it was like, oh great, just what he needs. As if his head couldn't get any bigger. But in reality, it has had a colossal impact on every aspect of my life. Because I now, for the first time ever in my life, I have started to understand that if I wanted to, I could lead a creative life. The thing that La La Land, the movie that is probably going to win Best Picture, because that's what happens when you make a movie about movies and a movie about Hollywood. La La Land is all about the living a creative life and the burdens it places on you. And I've always had to sell my labor to somebody else. That's the agreement. That's our culture. I've always had to have a corporate sponsor, a corporate patron, and work 40 hours a week and work on these big projects that I don't own and don't really have any control over. And my YouTube channel has given me the opportunity, which I haven't really taken up yet, and I may never take up because of how much I love my corporate masters. It's shown me that if I want to, I could play D&D, I could make YouTube videos, I could make D&D products like the Stronghold rules, which are forthcoming, I could write novels, and that ecology would be self-sustaining. And that's fantastic. It's also opened lots of doors for me. There's stuff I'm working on that I hope I get to share with you folks. A lot of projects, people approach me and say, hey, you want to do something? And it's always a question of finding the right stuff to do. And rare is the time where I'm as excited about this thing as the person pitching it to me. But there are a couple of projects I'm working on right now where I am super excited by it. And I hope it comes to fruition. Once you start dealing with the entertainment industry, you got to get up to bat 10 times before you get a single. So it will not surprise me and none of these things pan out. But there are lots of things I'm working on and people I'm talking to about stuff that if anything happens, it's going to be amazing. How do you feel about the fact that you are basically an authority and figurehead now for this game that you've been playing for 20 plus years? That's a complex question. I don't really, I guess it's because I don't consider myself an authority. That's something other people, some, not everybody, some other people think of me and Matt Mercer and Chris Perkins as like now the holy trinity of Dungeon Masters. Every time I see Matt Mercer about once a month, and every time we get together, typically just for lunch, just to hang out, the first thing we talk about and the last thing we talk about are always the same. And it's always, holy crap, can you believe we get to do this? Can you believe this thing that when we started, I think I started a little bit earlier than him, but that's only because I'm much older than he is. When we started, it was a hobby and an obscure one and a not a popular one, not a hobby that people were interested in. And now it's huge and we're able to share it with everybody. And it's just the fact that so many people now, they watch his show, they watch my videos, they watch Chris Perkins' stuff, and they're like, I can do this, I want to do this. That is, like I said at the beginning of the video, it brings me joy. I think it reminds me, I have to be mindful of my relationship with my audience. That's the thing. I'm lucky that I started on the internet. It wasn't the internet back then. I started with a modem and bulletin boards when I was 13. And so I've been communicating and being part of communities for most of my life. And so now that I have the opportunity to kind of be at the helm of a community, I have to be mindful of the things I say and the positions I take. But typically it's because I love all this stuff. I have loved every edition of D&D. I love Critical Role. I love the game Matt Mercer is running, even though that's not the game I'm running now. But I could run a game like that. I have run games like that before. Right now I'm running an old school game. I love dungeons. I love adventures. I love modules. I love improv. I love the whole thing. So I think that being a spokesman for it it's no hardship on my end because it's something I love and I've loved all of it. What did you do before you were a writer? Were you always a writer? Were you ever on the path to something else? Well, I wanted to be, when my mom asked me when I was 7 what I wanted to be when I grew up, the first answer I gave her was I wanted to be a writer. I used to write and draw my own comics, but I very quickly wanted to get into physics, and I spent a lot of time in college studying physics, and I basically got out of it because I felt like I wasn't ever going to be Richard Feynman. I wasn't ever going to get to contribute to the more you learn about some of these famous physicists, the more you realize that, like, as I considered it, physics was done. Like Richard Feynman got the Nobel Prize for correcting an error in quantum mechanics. He won his prize for quantum chromodynamics because he took quantum mechanics, one of the most successful hypotheses, one of the most successful theories in the history of science. He took this thing, which was brilliant, and solved all 99.9% of the problems. And then there's this tiny, like there's a couple zeros at the end here, and we wish these numbers are kind of fuzzy. And there was something else called quantum electrodynamics that solved some problems with electrons. And then now we can take this theory and say it's 99.999999% accurate for everything that happens. And then Richard Feynman and a couple other guys come along and they're like, well, we can figure out how photons work in this system. And now we have quantum chromo electrodynamics, and that rounds off like the 18th zero. And I'm like, holy crap, this is crazy. At that point, like, Newton got us 98% of the way there. And then for that 2%, we need stuff like quantum mechanics and relativity. And then so it's smaller and smaller and smaller slices of the pie. So I got out of physics and I got into game design. I took a job as a game designer and was a game designer for 10 years and then became a writer. I spent a lot of time in high school and college thinking I was going to be an actor, and that was less ridiculous then when I was young and fit, and I was really passionate about it, but there wasn't a clear, all my peers at that point in high school and college were all just, they weren't interested in the craft. They were interested in getting attention. And I just really wanted to study acting. And I couldn't figure out from North Orange County how to do that, what the path was. And so I think, and this is the lesson, if there's going to be a lesson, I think the reason I became a writer and not any of these other things that I loved and cared about, I'm not a musician, I've never had any aspirations to be I'm not a screenwriter, never wanted to be a screenwriter, never wanted to direct a movie or anything like that, is because when I was a little kid, and I think this is my hypothesis for how do people go from being not artists to artists. What's the switch? And the switch is we all love movies, we all love music, we all love books, we all love comics, everybody reads and consumes and TV, all this stuff. What is it that separates the people consuming it from the people making it? It's just that when you're a kid, one of these things, when you're watching it, like when I was watching Star Wars, or Close Encounters is a better example, when I was 15 and I was listening to Wind and Wuthering by Genesis, going all the way back to the Prag Chattery channel, this is tying everything together, I didn't have any idea where this movie came from. I didn't see actors up there. I wasn't aware of the existence of a director or an editor or John Williams composing the music. It arrived just sui generis on screen, this unique thing, and I took it on its own terms and I believed in it. And when I listened to Wind and Wuthering years later, this album, I was like, I can't tell, is that Tony Banks on keyboard or is that Steve Hackett's guitar? And I didn't know which instrument was which, or they all blended together, and I had no idea how an album was made. I didn't know what an engineer was. I didn't know what a mixing board was. But when I read The Hobbit, when I read The Once and Future King, especially that first book of The Once and Future King, which is a kid's book, kids authors do this. They deploy a lot of tricks, but one of the tricks they deploy is they talk directly to the reader. They say, as you know, a hobbit is this, that, and the other thing. And suddenly the author was talking to me. And that's a trick that authors use to get kids to read. So it feels like you're sitting on your parents' lap and they're reading you a story. It's brilliant. It's a super easy trick and it's very effective. But the effect it had on me was I was aware of the existence of the author. I knew, because of the way they used language and talked about themselves, right? If they're saying, as you know, that means there's a them talking. I was aware of Tolkien or T.H. White writing. And that made me aware that there was a thing called a writer, and that there was craft to this, and there was skill to it. And I just knew they had to go through lots of drafts, I bet. And why did they choose this word over that word? And that's the reason I went down that path instead of any other, was because of all the arts I loved, and we all love different arts in different ways. Writing was the one where I could detect the presence of the creator. All the other ones just arrived on stage in front of me, fully formed, and I had no idea, what a key grip was. Last question, and then we're done. Do you have a favorite class and race? Yes. Human paladin. Whenever I play a computer role-playing game, the first character I make is a human paladin. When I play in my friends' games, when I play as a player, I rarely play a human paladin these days, just because I did it so much. And I love lots of other characters. I love playing a monk. I love playing, a rogue or a ranger. There really isn't a class I'm not interested in playing, and I've played all of them, but I love the paladin. I love the fact that paladins have a code and they believe in something greater than themselves, and it's one of the few classes that comes with an ethos and a quest and the dispensing justice and believing in a god or a saint and pledging yourself to a higher power, as opposed to just the accumulation of wealth and power. I guess the reason I like paladins is because they come with their own, it's the only class that comes with a built-in narrative hook. And probably that says something about my personality, that I like that notion of the square-jawed hero dispensing justice. And I've always loved my friends, a lot of people who play with me, they have a different idea of what a paladin is like than a lot of the other people, because they're like, well, Matt never played a lawful, stupid character. They always saw my characters as being conflicted and existing in a kind of moral gray area, but still having convictions and taking things on a case-by-case basis and not being an inflexible idiot. Inflexible idiot being a very popular alignment among paladins. So that's it. That's the video. We did a Q&A, and before that we talked about YouTubers that I love, and before that we talked about how the contests go and just reaching 50,000 subscribers. Thank you folks for going on this journey with me and engaging with this content and believing that you can be a dungeon master and doing it yourself and spreading the word. It's the most fun you can have with your brain. I don't know how far we're going to be able to take this channel, but as long as there is more D&D to talk about, I'm going to keep making D&D videos. I do other stuff. I make videos about movies and stuff like that, and I'm enjoying working on D&D products like the Stronghold rules, which we will eventually take to Kickstarter, I think. Specifically Kickstarter because I want to get professional art and layout for it. I want it to be a real product. Every time I say that, people are like, but I just want the text, just gimme, gimme, gimme. I'm like, yeah, but you will believe in it more. Even those of you who think I just want the raw text, you will believe in it more, and it will seem like it has more value, and you'll be more likely to use it if it comes in a nice package. That's something I learned many, many years of being a designer. One of the things they don't teach you is presentation is part of design. And the way you present your game, the way you present your rules has a huge impact on the way people use them. And so that's why Kickstarter, I love the opportunity to get to do this stuff. I love the opportunity to get to talk to you folks and know that there are other like-minded people out there that just love D&D. And isn't it a great hobby? What other hobby is there that, I mean, tell your friends, tell your parents when they ask you what you're doing. You're like, look, D&D is creative. It involves math and critical thinking, and you learn to work as a group, and you learn leadership skills while you're at the table, and you learn how to negotiate and how to compromise, and you learn to write when you go home and you write up what happened in your D&D campaign, or when you're a dungeon master and you're writing up your notes. You learn to draw. Lots of artists got their start. My friend Phil got his start drawing his D&D characters and stuff like that. And now he runs a company, Turtle Rock Studios, that makes games like Left 4 Dead and Evolve that, people love and engage with. And you look at the art at, and that all started with this one guy's love of drawing his D&D characters. That's, it's a craft. It's, building terrain and stuff like that and painting minis. Is there any other hobby that encompasses such a wide variety of disciplines and virtues, and you really do become a better person, I think, in an act of playing this. You become more sensitive to other people's feelings, and you learn, like I learned being a dungeon master, you learn a lot about how each player is different. They each come to your table for different reasons, and it's kind of my responsibility to find out what those are, and to the best of my ability, within reason, cater to them. Long video, thanks for putting up with it. Some D&D content, some people ask good questions, and so we talked a little bit about D&D and some things that may be useful to you. Next video will be a campaign diary, and maybe a long one because we have a lot to cover. But then we'll get back to, I did a poll after that. We'll probably do a video on how to start your campaign with a bang, because I think that'll be a lot of fun. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Come by my Amazon page if you haven't done so already. Check out my books. A lot of people have read them and liked them quite a lot, and it brings me joy to see that people are reading them and talking about them. Check out the reviews if it seems like the kind of thing you'd like. I'll tell you this, a lot of people have told me that they don't read fantasy, or they don't read, and they checked out my books and loved them, if I do say so myself. And that was the kind of audience I was aiming for. I really wanted to do something like Heroes, right? Where they take comic book tropes that you sort of feel like you'd have to be, only a comic book fan would like this, and reskin it and redo it in a way that if you love comics, you loved Heroes, but if you were just a normal person, you loved Heroes. It was a great, for like the first 8 episodes, was a great TV show. That's the kind of thing I was trying to do with fantasy. So it always makes me happy when I see people engage with it who would otherwise found stuff like The Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones too dense and they bounced off it. If you're not interested in checking the books out, I hope to put my Stronghold rules in front of you and give people a whole other way to support the channel. I'm really happy with the way that project is going. I'm really excited to put that stuff in front of you. Until next time, the campaign diary, peace out.